seen the map of this land change 1,000 times. I remember when the Dane Hills were not a backdrop for young housing estates and tarmac veins, but a wild, rolling emerald expanse that breathed with the seasons. It was a place of deep silence, interrupted only by the heartbeat of the earth. But even then, there was a pocket of the hills that the light seemed to avoid, a bruise on the landscape where the air always felt 5 degrees colder. The sun does not set in the Dane Hills, it retreats. It flees behind the horizon as if afraid of what the shadows might become. I watched the sky turn the color of a fresh wound, purples and deep, sickly oranges, as the first villagers built their hovels within sight of the limestone cliffs. They were pioneers of a sort, but they were also prey. They did not yet know that the land beneath them was hollow, carved out by a hunger that predated their gods. There was no dialogue in those early days, only the sound of survival, the heavy thud of an axe against oak, the bleating of sheep penned in by hawthorn branches, and the frantic prayers whispered into palms. But the hills didn't care for prayers. Beneath the roots of a massive gnarled oak tree lay the entrance to Black Anne's bower. It wasn't a cave formed by water or time, but the scathed into existence by iron-hard talons. The walls were smooth, polished by the friction of a body that moved with the fluid, horrific grace of a spider. I stood at the threshold of that darkness. I saw the blue-skinned horror that inhabited it. She was not a woman, though she wore the shape of one to mock the living. Her face was the color of wood smoke and old bruises, dominated by eyes that held the cold, unblinking yellow of a dying star. And her teeth, long, yellowed ivory indented from the cracking of bone. She did not speak. She had no need for words when the scrape of her claws against the limestone told the world everything it needed to know. The villagers thought the hawthorn would save them. They believed the sharp thorns were a barrier that even a demon would respect. I watched from up high on the ridges as they wove the branches into their window frames and doors, their hands bleeding from the effort. They thought they were building a sanctuary. To Black Annis, they were merely wrapping her dinner in a different kind of packaging. I remember the first night she truly hunted. The moon was a sliver of a bone in the black sky. The village was silent, save for the occasional restless shift of cattle. Then came the sound, not a scream, but a soft, rhythmic snick, 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 the sound of claws finding purchase in the thatched of the roof. She did not break the doors, she simply unmade them. With the precision of a jeweler, her iron talons sliced through the wood as if it were wet parchment. I saw the silhouette of her massive, spindly frame as she perched atop a chimney, her long, gangly arms reaching down into the warmth of the home. There was no plea for mercy from the family inside, for they were paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming stench of stagnant bog water and old decay that clung to her tangled hair like a curse. When she emerged, she was no longer empty-handed. What she carried was small, wrapped in a blanket that fluttered in the cold air like a dying ember. A child, or rather, the promise of one. She never took gold nor heirlooms, nor anything a thief might covet. She took futures. She took the one thing a family could not replace, the one thing that would echo through generations, and she held it with a strange reverent care, as though she believed she was owed it. She retreated into the bower, trailing a thin dark line across the frost-covered grass. Even the hills seemed to tilt away from her path, as if the land itself refused to acknowledge her passage. Inside her cave, the decorations began to grow. I have seen the rafters of that limestone hollow. They are not draped in silk nor tapestry, but in preserved remnants of those she had taken, tokens, garments, fragments of lives interrupted. She arranged them with an unsettling tenderness, building a shrine of stolen stories, and around her blue limbs she wrapped her ghastly cloak, a patchwork of memory and loss, shielding himself from the eternal damp of the earth. Humanity has a limit to its terror. Eventually the fear turns into a desperate cornered animal's rage. I watched the local lords finally gather their courage, men in boiled leather and iron caps, carrying torches that flickered weakly against the oppressive dark of the Dane Hills. They did not come with songs of glory. They came with the grim silence of the executioner. They surrounded the oak tree. They poured fire into the mouth of the bower, hoping the smoke would choke the nightmare out. For hours, nothing moved. The fire died down to a glowing red eye in the dark. Then, out of the embers, she came. She was a blur of blue and grey. The torches were extinguished not by wind, but by the sheer velocity of her movement. I watched the dance from the shadows. She didn't fight like a soldier. She reaped like a harvester. Every motion carved space around her, sending men stumbling back in terror. The villagers' blades clanged harmlessly against her skin, which had the density of ancient stone. There was no shouting, no tactical commands, only the frantic gasping of men realizing they were outmatched by something primeval. She didn't destroy them all. She left enough to tell the story. She wanted the fear to remain. She wanted the village to know that the hills belonged to the hunger, and that the people were merely guests who paid rent in blood. And she enjoyed their fear not out of cruelty, but because it was the only language she believed humans understood. Fear shaped boundaries. Fear kept them away from her domain. To her, their terror was proof that the old laws still held, that the wild places of the world could still be commanded, respected, without ever speaking a word. Years bled into decades, and the Dane Hills began to change. The fear became part of the soil. The villagers stopped trying to hunt the hag, and instead tried to appease the hill itself. I saw mothers painting doorsteps with red ochre, a silent imitation of the blood she spilled, hoping to trick her into thinking she had already visited. But Black Annis was not a creature of ritual. She was a creature of appetite. I watched her grow older, though she did not weaken. Her skin became more translucent, like the ice on a winter pond, and her movements became slower, more deliberate. She no longer needed to hunt every night. The mere memory of her was enough to keep the hills quiet. I remember the last great winter of that era. The snow was so deep it buried the hovels to their eaves, and the world was a white, sterile void. I found myself near the bower, drawn by a sound I hadn't heard in centuries, a sound like rusted hinges being forced open. It was Anis, standing outside her oak, looking at the changing world. The first roads were being carved in the distance, the first stone churches rising. She didn't growl, she didn't hiss. She simply stood there, her long claws digging into the bark of the oak until the wood groaned. She understood that her time of absolute rule was ending, but she also knew that the concrete would never be thick enough to crush the spirit of the cave. She was the darkness that the modern world tries to pretend doesn't exist, the shadow that hides in the corner of your eye when the street lights flicker. Now, you have built your city of Leicestershire over the bones of the Dane Hills. You have paved over the limestone and replaced the hawthorn with iron railings. You think the story of Black Anis is a ghost tale for children, a way to make them behave before the sun goes down. But I am still here. I still see her. She has adapted. She no longer needs a cave beneath an oak tree when there are subways, basement vaults, and dark, damp spaces beneath your bridges. I see her blue limbs reflected in the puddles of oily rainwater. I hear the scrape of her claws against the metal of your fire escapes. She has traded her cloak of skins for the anonymity of the urban sprawl. I watched a young man walk home late last night, his head buried in his glowing screen, his ears filled with the noise of your machines. He didn't hear the snick, snick, snick of the claws against the brickwork above him. He didn't see the yellow eyes watching him from the ventilation shaft. He felt a chill, yes, the same prickle at the back of your neck that the first villagers felt 10 centuries ago, but he dismissed it as a draft. He reached his door, he turned his key, he thought he was safe, but as he stepped inside, I saw the shadow move behind him. A long blue arm, tipped with iron, reached out just as the door clicked shut. You think you are masters of these lands. You think that because you have named the hills and numbered the streets, the wild things have fled. But hunger does not flee. It only waits for you to forget. Black Anis is the price of this land. She is the reminder that beneath the tarmac, the earth is still raw, cold, and indifferent to your progress. She is the itch in your mind that tells you not to look out the window when the moon is full. She is the reason your ancestors left space at the edge of your field, a place where nothing was planted and nothing was built. Do not call for me. Do not seek the entity to protect you. I am a witness, not a savior. I will be here when your buildings crumble and the hawthorn returns to claim the streets. And she will be here too, waiting in her bower, her claws sharp, her hunger eternal. When the sky bruises tonight and the winds do a rasp against your glass, do not look, do not wonder, just bar your door and pray that the tribute you have paid with your fear is enough for one more night. The hills remember, the cave is still open, and Black Anis is forever still hungry.